Most of you know ALPA has frequently said that the most important safety feature on the airplane is a well-trained, well-rested professional pilot. But the hot topic in our industry for the last several years has been just exactly how do we get those professional pilots? What are the paths that someone who aspires to be an airline pilot, what are the paths for someone who aspires to be an airline pilot and actually becoming one? And more importantly, becoming the safest one possible from day one. Our next panel will take a look at the initial experience with the first officer minimum qualification rule, what it has and hasn't done, and they'll take a look at what's ahead. Our moderator for this panel is my dear friend, Captain Frank Cheeseman, Chairman of ALPA's ASO's Human Factors Training Group. Frank, please introduce your panel.
Thanks, Chuck. Pleasure to be here, and thanks to our staff, as usual, for doing a phenomenal job of putting everything together for a great forum. I'd like to just take a moment and congratulate our Dave McKenney again. I know Captain Kolisch just did that, but Dave spends a lot of time working inside of our technical group, and he just does a phenomenal job and very dedicated to our profession, the ALPA pilots, and really all that we do. So once again, not to steal anybody else's thunder, but thank you very much, Dave, for what you do. We've come a long way since the events of Buffalo a number of years ago. And in keeping with the theme of keeping us flying and keeping us flying safely, Chuck asked me to put together a panel that talks about pilot supply and specifically what's going on in the area of the first officer qualification. You know, from Buffalo, we came to the public law, and the Congress spoke very clearly. They wanted increased and improved qualification of our first officers in Part 121 operation. And it resulted from several incidents and accidents, not just Buffalo. And we anticipated and we dealt with implementation issues that occurred. And we did that collectively as an industry. And we learned, as usual, that the best way to handle these issues is collaboratively with regulators, airline certificate holders, and pilot representative bodies. And as I've said many times, and I think was very appropriate on one of our earlier presentations this week, there's approximately 95,000 airline pilots in North America, and we at ALPA represent 50,000 plus of those. And so we've earned a seat at that table, and we're very appreciative and respectful when we are given a seat at the table. And we've been given a seat at the table as well to deal with these issues when the Congress spoke, and we do appreciate it. But we're able to mitigate those issues that occurred in a collaborative fashion, as I mentioned. But ALPA's position is very clear. Captain Kolisch, Captain DePete went through that very clearly, that the supply issues for pilots in this country are largely associated with the quality of life, pay and benefits that are associated with this wonderful career. But that's not the only issue that's out there, and certainly the regulatory requirements play a role as well. And so it's attracted a lot of attention in the industry, no question about it. From the Regional Airline Association to A4A, Airlines for America, certainly our own one-day panel and symposium that we just hosted at ALPA on pilot supply issues, licensing, and certainly our participation in the Air Carrier ARC, dealing with first officer qualifications. So today we'd like to take a look at that, take a look back a little bit of history, and we have a great panel to talk about these issues because it affects every one of us, every one of our ALPA carriers, but we hear it on the jump seat, we read about it in the newspaper, we read about it in professional journals. But we have a great panel today, so I'd like to turn it over to them. Let me introduce them. First, we have Kent Lovelace from the University of North Dakota. He's a professional educator and deals with young people that are aspiring to enter this career. And he'll talk about some of the challenges that they and their families face. Then we'll get a perspective from Paul Kolisch. Paul works with pilot training at the Regional Airline Association, also works in the training program for Endeavor. We're lucky enough as well, and a great supporter of what we do at ALPA. We have Mr. Rob Burke from the FAA. He deals with pilot training, certification, all the things that touch every one of our aviators, and we thank Rob for being here today. And then we have a combined presentation from Dave McKenney, you just was introduced to him, and Jolanda Witvliet from United Airlines. She's also the National Membership Committee Chairman. And she'll talk to you a little bit about what our members are going through as they join our profession. So with that said, we are very much aware that we are standing between you and the final presentation, which shortly thereafter leads to cocktails and a great night. But I thank you for coming back from lunch. This is an important topic, very, very important topic. And so I'll turn it over to Kent for his comments, and then we'll have a few questions at the end of the time. Actually, we have some extra time, don't we, Chuck? Because you got done early? I don't know where Chuck is. But it looks like we may have a few extra minutes, which are very valuable, and we'll put them to use. So here you go, Kent.
Thank you, Frank. And thanks to Chuck and Frank and ALPA for this opportunity to speak. I'm going to talk about kind of the beginning steps of the pilot supply issue and what young people are thinking and where they're going. First of all, there's a lot of bright, informed, creative young adults out there that aspire to fly and fly professionally. They get that interest from many different places. A family member that flies, they had a fantastic trip on an airplane that one of you individuals flew them somewhere, and they become inspired to pursue flying. First slide I'm going to show is we ultimately don't know how many young people are interested in a professional flying career. This is some data from the National Research Council on College and University Admissions. And basically it's numbers that we get at our institution at the University of North Dakota. And these are high school juniors with their self-reported B or higher average, again self-reported. And here's the trend of what we've gotten. And the reason we use this data is this organization claims they survey 70%, reach out to and capture 70% of the high school students in the United States. And they survey them on 65 different career areas, 2 of which happen to fall under aviation, aviation flight and aviation technical. And you can see the general trend. I guess just from glancing at it, it's certainly not going up. At best, it's risen from 2006 through 10, but it's kind of stagnant. And the thing to remember that ALPA did a study in 2010, and out of those that study, people that are learning how to fly, 29% aspire to fly professionally in some capacity. The typical concerns that I run into talking to parents and students, there's 3 basic questions. How much is it going to cost? How will I pay for it? And what's the pay after I start in the profession? And those questions have reigned true for the last 30 years plus of my involvement in collegiate aviation. Where they want to go is varied. We did a study in 2013 as a part of a pilot supply forecast. We redid the same questionnaire or survey in 2015 here this last spring to see if there was any differences in career aspirations post FOQ rule versus in 2013 when we did it, it was still pre FOQ rule. The final rule hadn't come out. We asked, what was your original goal when you started flying? And that's what appears on the left. And you can see from there that there's a varied interest. And then we asked them, once they were now flying in pilot training, what was their long-term career goal? And you can see there's a loss of interest in the airline career. Corporate aviation interest goes up a little bit. Other is wide-ranging. And part of the reasons for this change of goal, there was 391 comments out of roughly 800 participants in this last survey. And overwhelmingly, the FOQ rule was a reason cited for the career aspiration change. on the costs and in terms of the required flight hours, the costs associated with time and time building and training time and so forth with the ATP, CTP, financial considerations in terms of the pay versus the cost of career preparation. They do get exposed to other careers. Probably the most visible part of aviation in terms of a profession is the airline industry. Our job within collegiate aviation is to try to show them all aspects of the career field and various segments of the industry. And then lifestyle issues are another concern that they have, which kind of falls in line with millennials. They're not as willing to let the professional life interrupt their personal life, and so those lifestyle issues become very, very important to them. Where do they go after they're deciding what they want to do? Obviously, universities, 2-year, 4-year institutions, academies, and FBOs. The large training academies basically indicate that roughly 95+% of their student population is international students, which stems from a lack of financial means to fund their education. At the collegiate level or higher education level, we have access to more financial aid, so I think more individuals are heading that direction. Enrollment trends are not increasing significantly. You would think in the aspect of the FOQ with the restricted ATP minimums and the institutional authority provisions, we'd be seeing large increases. We're not. I don't know of anybody that's just anecdotally talking to other colleagues at other institutions where we're seeing significant increases. We're up a little bit, as an example, at UND, 5% increase in professional flight majors. Whether that turns into actual increased students at the time of enrollment is another issue, and we won't know that till we're well into the fall semester. But another thing that needs to be considered here is all the people that start on this track don't finish on this track. And again, anecdotally, talking to several different colleagues at several different institutions, the attrition rate's probably close to about 50% of those who start with an intent to learn how to fly and those that actually graduate in that major. They may change their majors to other aviation disciplines. Many do. But not nearly anywhere near all of them do complete their college degree in terms of the major in which they intended originally. Some information on indebtedness. There was a 2012 survey that we conducted, and the average indebtedness was $73,000 at the time of that survey, with 26% reporting a debt load of over $100,000. Our average at our institution is about $45,000 in terms of an aviation student debt load. Once they decide to go into a program, and I'll speak to UND, but I'm here representing collegiate aviation and to a degree the structured academies. What they get in the training and in their education in many respects replicates what they will find out in the professional world. We have well over 1,000 hours of flight-related, aviation-related academics that's integrated with flight training. Like the airline industry has to maintain a schedule, we expect schedule integrity also in terms of launch and recover times. Flows, checklist discipline, CRM, threat error management is all a part of the training and education. Outcomes-based assessment, while we still have a prescriptive requirement in terms of FAA practical test standards. Most organizations within higher education that are accredited by ABI, the Accreditation Board International, relies on outcome-based assessment. We have MELs. You don't need an MEL for a general aviation airplane. You don't need an SMS system. We're currently level 3 SMS, and that's the old nomenclature. We're moving to level 4 SMS here in January. We have our own flight data monitoring system. We've got data recorders aboard the airplane. We have an events review committee. We have gatekeepers, and we have a safety reporting system. So what they encounter in a structured training program is very similar to the airline world, we just do it at 0.12 Mach instead of 0.82 Mach. That's the big difference. I think for more interest to occur within young people, there needs to be more industry support. The ALPA ACE program is an excellent example of that. Very, very successful. We're on about every month cycle. ALPA representatives, captains, first officers come in and meet with students and talk about the profession and uplifting of the profession and the professionalism required within those career fields. I think another thing that has to happen in the industry is salary increases and or financial support from industry to realize the additional training costs and educational costs that young people encounter. And then the industry needs to realize the quality of life issues are very, very prevalent within this generation, and they don't put the job necessarily ahead of their lifestyle, and I can't criticize them for that, looking back at my own career and my children and family. And the last thing, I think there needs to be more defined career paths where people have a set path, and it's not a guarantee, but it's a more defined path, and people are more willing to invest in the profession. So those are some suggestions that I have.
Sure.
With that, I'd like to, again, thank you for the opportunity for speaking and look forward to the questions.
Kent, a couple of questions quickly. Actually, not quickly, because we have a little extra time.
Okay.
On your graph, look at this, is interesting. Military pilot interest has gone from 11% to 5%?
Correct.
Now, you're obviously out talking to people in the industry, both the Navy and Air Force.
Yep.
Are they concerned about this? Are they aware of this as well?
Well, we've got at least on our campus, I can't comment on all, but I'm assuming it's the same. There's actually a pretty heavy emphasis of the military coming to college campuses for recruitment, and they are talking about their own pilot shortage or limited resource
Sure.
there that they have on line for their own needs. So they're active on the,
They're
on
active.
the campuses. Yeah.
An interesting anecdotal in Colorado at the Aviation School in Colorado Springs, the Air Force Academy, we just sent 360 or so young second lieutenants off the pilot training out of a class of 850. And I'm steadily watching these numbers drop. And part of it certainly is the force multiplication issues or capabilities of aircraft in the military. We just simply need fewer pilots because certainly an F-35 is more capable than an 1970s generation F-15. But it's interesting to see the different career fields that are important in the military and how we are training fewer and fewer aviators at both the Air Force Academy and the Naval Academy. Now, how does that affect this? Well, I hear some airlines say, well, we'll just get them when they retire from the military, even though that's a small contribution. If there's fewer people coming in, there's certainly fewer people retiring as well. Kent, one other last very quick question. How are the young people bridging the gap between the hours they will have when they graduate, between the hours they have when they graduate to the hours that are required for their ATP?
Good question, Frank. And again, as a part of this survey, we asked that question as we did in 2013 and got very similar results. 82% of the respondents said that they would plan to get their additional flight hours they needed to build up towards their ATP or restricted ATP, primarily through flight instruction, with the rest of the group making a combination of either paying for it on their own, but that's a small population, or seeking some other type of commercial activity, whether it be Part 135 VFR, you have to get 500 hours to be Part 135 VFR, you have to go 1,200 hours to get Part 135 IFR, so they're still limited as to what kind of commercial applications
Sure.
they can choose.
So is there a strong competition to stay in your program and teach?
We have I don't know of any collegiate program or academy that isn't suffering from a mild flight instructor shortage.
Okay.
Actually, Transpac was one of the large academies, just said, I got a mailing from it because I'm on the flight instructor national list. They're giving a $3,000 signing bonus for flight instructors, which is a new twist in addition to 5-day work weeks, 401ks.
Wow.
medical, dental, and so forth. We do the same thing. We provide insurance for our flight instructors, but there's not an overabundance of them, and that's an issue. The only well, I shouldn't say the only. That's not fair. One of the positive things of the FOQ is that it stabilizes the flight instructor force, because right now, without it, you would probably see flight instructors leaving to various other carriers, regional carriers primarily, down into the 300 and 400 hour range, similar to what took place in 05 through 07, and it's mitigated some of that loss. We kind of know when somebody's going to leave about when they get about, actually some of them 968 hours, because the training footprint at the regional carrier, they know what it is, and they're going to leave at that time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One last comment before we move on to Paul. As I said earlier, I have one of these 17-year-old millennials, and we've been having the college briefing with him, and as many people know, I'm a man of few words, and that is kind of a joke in our ASO, but I was a man of few words when my son Jacob said, "I'm interested in this school," and I was speechless from a financial perspective. It was shocking, and to see the amount of money that's required from a family to educate a young person, and families are looking at what's the return on investment here. So,
Right.
Okay, so a young person goes out, they graduate from an outstanding aviation program, they stay on board, they get their flight time, and the next thing you know, they're lucky enough to get hired by one of our fine regional carriers, and they walk in the front door, and just like any other training program at any other airline, at any major or around the world, they're going to bring strengths, they're going to bring weaknesses, and they're going to bring their issues. Captain Kolisch, you're on.
Thank you on behalf of the RIA and Endeavor Air for having me. We have gone from hiring no one for several years to hiring lots. And I was there when we were hiring lots in 07, 08, and it's a very interesting difference between now and then. I should say, before I start saying any numbers to you, that H.G. Wells pointed out that Satan delights equally in statistics and quoting scripture. So my statistics may not be accurate, but they certainly reflect what we've been experiencing. During this period where we had Endeavor to Delta, which had Delta interview, Delta requirements to come in, we had very few people that were hired. Over almost a year, 36, of whom 30 successfully completed training. That's about a 17% washout rate. This year, of the people we've hired, 78 have actually finished ground and sim training and gone to they would have been eligible to go to the line, and we managed to get 45 through. Many required extra flight training device lessons. Even more required extra sim training. And even after that, we had several unsats. And we're not that hard to deal with, and we don't send people to the Lions. We don't send a pilot for a check ride until he's ready. And I might add that these check rides are the same as the check rides that we had in the early 2000s, a 121, 441 check ride, which, if you look at the regulations, qualifies for an ATP and a type rating, assuming you've applied for one. So we haven't changed the standards. Nonetheless, we certainly had much better luck in 07 and 08 than we're having now. And I say this from a carrier that went 68 years before we handed in our certificate without ever having a hull loss caused by a pilot, nor ever having a fatality in the air or on the ground. So we care about maintaining that record. In 2008, of 277 pilots that I was able to get the information that I needed, 52 had greater than 1,500 hours, and 225 had fewer than 1,500 hours, down into the range of 230, as low as that. During that period, this shocked me. I did not expect this. 15+% of the high time people had unsatisfactory check rides initially, and only 8.5% of the people with fewer than 1,500 hours had an initial unsat check ride. I did not expect that. Over the period of years following, those same 277 pilots completed 2,962 checks, of which obviously most were among the low-time people, because there were more of them. And we had a total of about 2.3 unsat of all those checks, 1.7 of the low time, 4.7 of the high time. The message being that we find no evidence in our population that high time equals better quality. I wish it were true, because I have to spend, when I'm not making coffee at the office, time counseling with pilots and check airmen and so forth about where the problems may be and how we solve them, because we want them to succeed. We need them to succeed. What do they lack? Primarily instrument skills. And that's one of the unfortunate paradoxes, if you will, of flight training. Flight training is really useful activity, a good way to build time, but unless the instructor takes time to get down on the gauges, he will lose those skills. And the lower time he has, the more likely that will be to occur. Study habits. We find that many of the pilots who have been out of school for quite a while don't have disciplined study habits, and they have to be counseled in that regard. When I talk to my friends at Sabina in Brussels, they find a difference in the time between May graduates going immediately into ground school and the same graduates going into September. Those same graduates don't perform as well just a few months later. Believe it or not, language. We've had several instances in the last several months where the pilot either could not make himself understood or could not understand what he needed to understand either in the classroom or in the simulator.
Was that because of just language differences?
Language differences.
English is a second language to them?
Second or third, perhaps.
Okay.
Right.
Understand.
So we would like to see more opportunities for pilots to build useful time. And the most useful time, quite frankly, we believe is scheduled 135, since the pilots are not eligible for 121. There's just an enormous difference in the quality of performance between those pilots and those without that experience. Oh, by the way, money does talk. I'm with Endeavor, and we now pay a decent wage, $50,000 for a starting first officer, and no one comes close to that in the regional business.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't necessarily buy quality.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of questions, just sitting here thinking. Is there a dialogue? Clearly, the RAA is an excellent link, but is there a dialogue between the universities, the aviation programs, and the regional carriers to express what you just expressed? Do you frequently converse about what you would like to see improved in the aviation programs out in the field?
Well,
Is there a mechanism for doing that?
we have our good friends in North Dakota who we can communicate with,
Sure.
but there's no 135 program in their office.
Right.
But we certainly exchange information.
Sure.
Kent and I serve on several committees together.
Where that data
And-
is discussed.
Right, and that's true for numerous other regional carriers meeting with universities.
So there's a pretty robust dialogue then going on
There is.
on how they can improve their programs. Because if we can fix it up front, then you'll have fewer problems there.
I don't find fault with their programs.
Yeah, I understand. Ken?
Well, there's, as a part of our operating as a good practices, so to speak, in our accreditation requirements, most collegiate programs that are accredited have to have a industry advisory board. I know some of the large academies have industry advisory boards that meet a couple times a year, at least ours does. There's one member there is in the audience from Delta Airlines. Thank you, John. But we find that to be invaluable.
Right.
So we look forward to any kind of input. That's very, very important to us.
That's important. I think if you can obviously improve the programs at the front end,
Great.
Paul and his partners in the regionals are going to receive a better product. Sounds like there's some, but I can tell you that as a narrow body captain at United, we were talking about this morning, I have people in the jump seat, and I'm so impressed by the young people that are coming into this industry, and they're phenomenal. They're bright. Their threat and error management skills are very good. They're learning it early on, and you can tell. I was just taxiing out the other day in O'Hare, and this young man, he knew exactly when to speak up. He goes, "Captain, use caution. There's a fire truck crossing Delta." "Hey, thanks, man. I didn't see that. I owe you one." And that came naturally to him. That wasn't an act. He just knew what to say and when. It was much appreciated. So, you know, it just came to my brain here, which is overloaded as usual, that there's probably some people out here that don't quite understand maybe how this whole situation and the whole discussion that we're having here came to be. And I think it'd be useful to go back at this point, kind of hit the reset button for a minute and talk about the public law, some of the things that came out in the public law, how the public law came to be, and some of the items that were on there mandated by the Congress to the FAA. And let's face it, this was a new method of operation. I don't know how many of you were here for Congressman DeFazio's conversation with us earlier this week, but to me, it was quite interesting to see the involvement of a political body jumping into the regulatory body and directing what the FAA would do in terms of regulating the industry. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn it over to Rob Burke. He can give us a little bit of history, tell us what's been done and what's left on the punch list. And it sounds to me there's a couple items left. One of them was maybe mentoring. So Rob, you got it for a couple minutes.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Sure.
And as Frank mentioned, some of this work started back at Buffalo. And after the accident in Buffalo, Congress enacted H.R. 5900. I'm sure many remember that vernacular. Once it was signed by the President, turned into Public Law 111-216, which directed the FAA to take on many studies, seek many recommendations on various topics that were viewed as causal factors to that accident, and I believe Pinnacle as well in Lexington. Flight duty and rest, first officer qualifications, which turned into the ATP rule. N&O, we addressed stall and upset, and mentoring, which is next on the list, as Frank alluded to. You know, we started off talking about first officer qualifications, and that was something the FAA was already looking at. We had an ARC set up, an aviation rulemaking committee, looking at what are the requirements, what should be the requirements of a first officer entering 121. And that was around the same time the public law dropped, and it gave us clear direction that they will have an ATP certificate. So then we started looking at what education, what structured training can, if any, supplant experience. Is there a balance there? Can certain structured training and education lower the flight time requirements to meet the same standard? And all those things were looked at. The FOQ ARC provided recommendations, and we published the ATP rule, which required ATP certification in 121 airline operations, and also added training requirements, which was new. I mentioned the ATP certification training program earlier. Kent did in his slides, and that was a big rule. It was interesting that time period when Congress directed us to do all of these things. It was a shotgun approach. They directed us to do lots of different initiatives at once, and it became clear to us early on that the ATP rule necessarily had to come first. We can't write training rules in parallel until we know what the beginning story is. What does the ATP pilot entering the 121 look like before we can write the 121 rule, and then before we can write the mentoring rule on how to mentor that pilot. So they've come out in sort of that chronological order. What does the ATP look like entering a 121? What does that training look like once they're at the carrier? And the next rule that we're pushing up for consideration and comment is the mentoring rule, which will be called pilot professional development. So that rule is looking at, Congress directed us to look at mentoring for new first officers, mentoring for new captains, look at the development of a committee at a carrier to leverage labor and carrier training personnel, to look at a committee to look at the quality assurance of a mentoring program and feedback, and then also look at leadership and development training. So we had many of them. We had an ARC on mentoring, and we've received those recommendations. We've taken those recommendations under consideration, and most importantly, we've taken what we've done already and tried not to have duplicative requirements, and we've also tried to make each rule complement each other. So that's what's coming down the line. It's in executive review now, and we should be publishing that, I imagine, at some point this year.
Good, thanks, Rob. You know, I was sitting here thinking, this is awesome. I actually get to ask our FAA inspector some questions. So you're going to sit right there till I'm done and sign off your sheet.
It's the heat lamp, right?
There you go. It's the heat lamp. There you go. I love it. But I'm going to take advantage of this for a minute because there's a lot of confusion. You hear about it out on the line all the time. First officers, captains talking about it, jump seaters, and particularly they'll ask a question. Hey, what about this? What about this licensing scheme that's going on around the world? This PLM, MLP. I know that, but
I didn't know what you were talking about.
You didn't know what I was talking about, and so the pilots, and I said, no, you mean the multi-crew pilot license, which is a program that's being used in ICAO endorsed licensing practice, and there's certainly some good things in it. What's the FAA's position on MPL right now?
So I don't know if there's an official FAA position.
Sure.
It is a methodology. There's lots of training methodologies out there.
Absolutely.
We have the ACT-ARC, which is looking at an alternative pathway, alternative pathways to ones that were already created. We talked about the first officer qualification rule. There's 4 different ways you can obtain an ATP certificate today. I talked about the direction to get that rule out. Was there anything we missed? Is there any other pathways that make sense to make a better first officer out there? And that's what the ACT-ARC is looking at. They're still working on their recommendations and haven't provided it to us yet, but it's something we're looking forward to. If it makes sense, if it produces a better pilot, we're certainly open to that.
What's interesting, though, it's pretty clear that right now the certification standard for a Part 121 pilot in this country is the ATP.
It is the ATP.
It's the ATP, and I think there's still a lot of confusion out there, even with our aviators. Thanks for talking about that. You mentioned one thing. When you talk about professionalism and mentoring, or any other kind of training program for that matter, it's hard to measure its effectiveness, isn't it? Are we going to try to figure out a way to do that, or is this just going to be pie in the sky, looks good?
Yeah, I hope we don't do anything that's pie in the sky.
Sure.
I think we've evolved quite a bit. I think in the past, we looked at accident data to determine effectiveness.
Sure.
And we're constantly evolving big data. We're looking at incident data as well, and always trying to constantly improve. I mentioned, the idea of a committee for mentoring. If there's a committee that has a feedback mechanism, we started, I think AQP was the first to formalize the feedback loop. A feedback loop back into the system to report its effectiveness and then adjust and go on again. I think through those methodologies, data and continuous improvement, that you can measure it.
Yeah, we're learning also in observing CRM of skills, observable behaviors, for example,
Sure.
that if we do this in the right way, we can actually quantify and grade, if you will, maybe not a great term, but assess observable skills. And are pilots doing what they should be doing to mentor and help each other out? So I wanted to thank you, Rob, for engaging and always working with us and working with the industry to come up with the best rules for our pilots. That was a tough time, I know, for the FAA. I'm not here sucking up to the FAA, certainly. We're partners in all this, but that was certainly a tough time when that rule came out. And they gave you some pretty short suspenses, did they not?
They did, and we appreciate all of industry and ALPA's support in providing those recommendations, because without that, we're in a dark room writing it on our own. So.
Absolutely. One last thing before we move on to our last speaking stream here. There was all kinds of rumors flying around out on the line that people were losing their jobs at different places. They're not going to get their ATP in time. Did that happen anywhere that you know of?
Anecdotally, I don't have the data.
Yeah, we don't have any data, but Paul, can you?
We had a number of pilots we had to take offline,
You got to take them off the line.
and we still have at least a couple of them providing ground school training. One of them is one of our managers, experienced 121 pilots that were not allowed to fly anymore.
Okay, but are they back flying right now?
No,
They're not.
no, because they need a means to build the time.
Right. Right.
We keep them pretty busy doing the training.
Right. But so you'll hear a lot of cockpit conversation that people were unable to certify.
That's true.
Yeah, and so that's interesting. There was also some, Rob, but we have just an extra minute or two. Wasn't there something about the August 1st of last year? Wasn't there an important date in there about the CTP, ATP? Remember that?
Sure.
Can you go over that with us?
Yeah, so I mentioned the training requirements for the ATP certificate.
Right.
There was a date, there was a lead-in time for people to develop the course, and after that date, you would have to have this training program before you're eligible to take the practical test, basically, or to take the written test. It's the prerequisite to the written test. So there was of course a rush to take the ATP certificate,
Exactly.
12,000, I believe.
Right.
And now after that date, the ATP certification training program is a requirement, is a prerequisite to the knowledge test.
Right, and so if you look at the cost piece of this, and certainly our regulators don't get involved in this piece, but it was a significant increase in cost, wasn't there, Kent? Did you know a little bit about that when the new rules went in place?
Yeah, most of the new, most of the approved ATP, CTP training providers, the cost is around $5,000, $4,500 to $5,000. So that's an additional strain to a young person who's already incurred debt. And I know a lot of regional carriers have started to provide a path to an ATP, CTP that they take care of, but they need to do that because the young people just can't stand anymore.
Yeah, the financial burden
It's just too much.
became
Right.
too much. Well, we know as professional aviators that once we get to an airline, we become brothers and sisters in the cockpit, and it's our job to mentor and put our arms around each other in a figurative sense and pick us up when we're down and mentor us along the way in our careers. And as I mentioned earlier, we know that the key to success there is really a partnership between our certificate holders, our airlines, our regulators, and also our pilot representative bodies. And we know that we have models for it. ASAP, FOQA, developing threat and error management, the numerous ARCs that we've worked together on through the years have developed very, very positive results in a number of areas. And so at ALPA, I can say this, that when the mentoring rules come out, we'll participate in that and put together the most effective programs for our pilots. But there's already some programs going on at some of our ALPA carriers right now in terms of mentoring and taking care of each other and mentoring in the career. So I'd like to turn it over to a team approach here. And so Jolanda, Dave, you guys are going to talk to us about mentoring and is mentoring training and is training mentoring and how far in your career should it go? And you got it. You got the floor for a few minutes. So self-moderate, if you will.
Thanks, Frank. Unfortunately, I'm just starting to lose my voice, so we'll...
We can still hear you.
Okay, excellent. So the industry traditionally is very good at mentoring in a kind of a casual way, where the senior captain takes the interested young man under or young woman under their wing, shows them around, maybe takes them up for a flight, and talks about what kind of training you need, what kind of job it's like, and might even help them get a job. And that kind of informal mentoring, I think, will continue on in this industry for a long time. We also have pilots that go into high schools, they go into middle schools, they promote the profession, they talk about their job and what a great job it is and what wonderful benefits you have. ALPA has swag that they bring, and they bring it along and they give it to the kids and they love it. And we also, as Kent mentioned, the ACE clubs for the Education Committee from ALPA. It's a fantastic program. We have many volunteers that go into various colleges and they visit with them at least once a month, and they talk about the industry and the trends, and they make connections, and it's an extremely valuable program for us to have through the industry. And then we have what I call more like a formal mentoring program. There wasn't really very much going on, right, during the industry when after 9/11, when the industry pretty much was flat. There was a lot of furlough going on. There wasn't a lot of upgrades going on. So mentoring kind of fell by the wayside. There wasn't much going on. So now with the hiring boom, there's a huge need for having mentors, good mentors, be involved. We have many captains that are new, that are upgrading. We have an incredible number of new hires. United Airlines alone is 1,000 pilots this year, from a wide variety of backgrounds, from a 24-year-old to a 61-year-old. Military pilots that are only flown actively in the military, to all the way corporate pilots, to helicopter pilots, and it makes for an incredibly diverse background.
And one of the things that we often forget, and we kind of lost some of this when we lost the engineer in the airplane, is the mentoring of what I want to call piloting experience, airmanship. When many of us sat, the older ones like myself, sat as an engineer for a little bit, we got to watch the captain and the first officers and see their experience and see what they did. And then as we lost that seat and people are starting out right in the right seat, they're kind of thrown right into the action without even getting mentored. And then when we got into, some of us refer to, after 2001 there, the dark ages, because nothing really happened for about 10 years. A lot of things became stagnant. And I think as an industry and a labor pool is not only do we mentor people into the profession and get them into our companies, which a lot of programs are doing, but I think what we need to do is look within ourselves as a labor union And how do we keep those people interested? How do we mentor? How do we share the experience that the senior people have to the junior people entering our profession, especially the airmanship and piloting skills that we've used, because times have changed and we use a lot of that. As many of you know, as pilots, our biggest, one of the biggest things we do is manage change. But we do that based on the experience we've had. And our training, a lot of it has gone now to distance learning. We're not in the schoolhouse together as much anymore. We don't have that interaction that we also had 10, 15 years ago. So how do we leverage technology? And I spoke about that before, is how do we leverage technology and divide our training up so that we still provide our new hires, our existing pilots, new captains, how do we mentor them and get to make sure that they get the experience that they need? So Jolanda, yeah, tell us about some of the programs right now that you've seen out in the system.
Well, I know Hawaii has a very robust program, and so does Envoy and United Airlines. We started that about a year ago, and it was more ALPA driven. We focus on a lot of issues such as reserve rules, commuting, what should you watch out for when you commute, things such as ground transportation, how do you get around the 3 airports in New York. Also, personal health. A lot of people are not used to commuting.
Yeah.
They never commuted before, and they don't know what it's like to commute and be gone from the family. They fly to destinations that they've never been to before. Our new hires go in the 756 and 76T, and they fly overseas to Europe. It's a whole different theater where they're not familiar with. So a lot of these kind of things is what we are focusing on in the mentor program. Delta Airlines has a mentor program that's company driven, and it has some union input. So it's a little bit of a different concept from the way we're running our program, because ours is strictly ALPA.
And I think what we found in the past is that like we partner with the FAA, RAA, A4A and stuff, and we build these programs together. That's probably the most important thing that we can do, because we each have our missions to do. And I think as a pilots, you know, we need to bring in our pilot culture. One thing I think is I've seen before is that we have a company culture, but in the cockpit, in the flight decks there, we also have how do we operate as a pilot association. And with the mergers, many of us have learned firsthand that 2 different companies can fly the same airplanes, even have some of the same procedures, but we run the flight deck differently. We have different cultures in there. So how do we mentor the people to come in into that? So what is it? I know you mentioned some of the subjects, and I have, but what other subjects should we be mentoring?
Well, one of the things, of course, we're looking at, as you mentioned, ALPA, ALPA's history. We talk about that. We talk about the culture of the airline, some of the professional standards, CRM. What are the expectations? What do we expect from a new hire when they come to United Airlines? And when we talk to them, we have them in phases. We first contact them straight out of basic induct before they go into the simulator. And then we also connect with them if they have training issues. We tell them very clearly, if you have training issues, please contact us, because it's a lot easier to work with these issues than it is to wait until you failed a check ride or you've failed your validation and you have to do it again. So we highly encourage them to talk to us. If they feel overwhelmed, we can schedule them for more training before something happens. And we found that to be very, very effective. The other thing we work with is IOE. What do you expect on an IOE? How does it go to the IOE? What can we do to help you? So the mentors discuss how do you prepare yourself for it? And also just things such as what happens when you have something happening in your family. We recently had a situation where a new hire was informed by his family that one of his parents was close to unfortunately dying. And so he wasn't sure who to contact and who to talk to. So he contacted his mentor, who contacted me, and we took him off the trip. He was still planning on flying this trip, which was not the smartest thing. No. So with his, luckily he called his mentor, and we were able to get him off the trip. We were able to find him a ticket so he could go and fly and say goodbye to his father. And we also hooked him up with the chirp people for grief counseling. So ALPA has a lot of resources, and we were able to provide these resources to him. So that's one of the many success stories that we have working with these mentors.
So the mentors, yeah, we'll turn the focus to that a little bit. The qualifications of what we're looking for in a mentor. So we know that obviously we try to train pilots to be good communicators. You know, we need to make sure, I think they're enthusiastic, they're persistent, because especially when we have on the new hire side,
Yeah.
that they have to engage with them and have a schedule that does. So some of the programs we have, is it a formal? Is it a formal program where they're getting paid, or is it a volunteer system? But how do they select them, and what type of systems do we have out there?
If I understand correctly, Envoy and Hawaii and United, it's all the same. It's volunteers. We don't get paid for the training. We don't have any flight pay loss. Delta, if I understand correctly, their initial training program is done on their paid days on. They get paid to be there. Then after that, their mentoring is on a volunteer basis. So you do have to have a mentor that can spend some time, because it does take your time. It takes a while to talk to a new hire, especially if you have somebody like a corporate guy who's never commuted, doesn't know what a union contract is, has never even looked at a contract, doesn't know anything about FAR 117. It's difficult for them to just jump into that program. It's very overwhelming to them. One of the things we even find out is when we contact the mentor. I contacted one this morning, a new hire, and I go, "You haven't talked to your mentor for 6 months." He goes, "Yeah, I've been so overwhelmed." So for them, they were so overwhelmed that they couldn't even contact their mentor. So there's still some tweaking to be done on the mentor program, obviously. But when you look at it, you really need to see, what is it that you are mentoring? Are you mentoring new hires that are all basically the same background? Or are you mentoring, like in our case, and in Delta's case, huge type of different backgrounds? When you look at somebody who's an active military pilot, who comes straight out of the military, who's got no civilian background, it's quite a different program that you want to mentor versus somebody who's been like an express jet pilot based in Newark, and now he's going to go on the 737, a very similar mission.
Sure.
The mentoring is quite different. So you need to have a program that is flexible, that can adjust to the type of mentee that you have, the type of new hire that you have.
So from listening to that, it sounds like some of it's a gray area between what's training and what's mentoring.
Yes.
And so I think when I listen to that, I'm thinking to myself that what we probably need to be doing is making sure that, again, that we're working together. And I think with the regulation, and I'm hoping that Rob comes out with some good stuff for us, like he always does, is that it forces almost the, I won't say force, but that's probably a bad word, but the company to work with the union to develop what is in the training versus what's in the mentoring, and the programs are actually interlinked in some respects, so that we're sending the same message, and we know what the course material is, and so we don't want the mentors teaching. It should be maybe in what we call the indoctrination program, the NDOC, whatever we call
Correct,
it,
yeah.
to make sure that we're putting the appropriate material there and not in
Yeah, we make it clear to the mentors that they are not there to redo or rehash the basic INDOC program, and they're not simulator instructors, that they are mentors to try to help them find resources. One of the things that we want them to do is, if they have a question, then not only do we want the mentor to make sure that the answer gets produced, but also so the new hire knows where to find these answers. Where are the resources, or what website, what page do they need to go to, who do they need to talk to in the flight office, where can they find stuff in the manual if they can't find it, or in the contract, what kind of reports do they need to file. That's all very important information that the mentor needs to know on how to help them find these resources.
Is it possible to provide with volunteers, which it sounds like many of them are, with a consistent product to
That is a
the
challenge.
mentorees?
Yeah, we have, at United, we have 80 mentors, and there are 80 different independent operators. It's a good thing, and it's a bad thing. It's a good thing because now you have people that can really tailor-make your mentoring to the people that you have. Unfortunately, you now have 80 independent operators that are not all calibrated. They're kind of all over the place. Sure. So that's one of the challenges of the mentor program that we are going to be facing.
Dave, can I jump in for just a second?
Sure.
Ken, do you have any Is there any discussion of mentoring at the collegiate level?
In terms of
Just
from industry or?
Well, just at the
internally?
collegiate level, is there anything in the curriculum about, hey, you know what, part of it, of being an airline pilot, and part of our profession is taking care of each other and helping each other out when they're new.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if we call it mentoring per se.
Maybe professional standards, something like that.
Professionalism that's taught in classes. Part of the expectation, we've always required at our institution somebody to get a flight instructor certificate for several reasons. The first reason is it makes them a better pilot.
Right.
Secondly, we know that down the road they are going to have to teach as a captain or even teach as a first officer to a captain. So we want them to be have that basis and that knowledge. A lot of programs don't require it. We do because we've always believed in it. The third reason is, of course, it's an employment issue. But
Yeah, absolutely.
we do get mentoring again from the industry. Some of these defined career paths that are in place, notably Cape Air and JetBlue. JetBlue actually provides JetBlue captains as mentors to young people that are in the program.
Interesting.
Which is an excellent way to go.
Interesting.
And then a couple of the regionals provide regional captains or first officers as mentors for the students that are involved in those programs. And there
Excellent.
needs to be more of that.
Absolutely. And I have a couple other questions, and that was great, guys. I'm not cutting you off, but they're just in my head here, so I want to make sure I get them done. Rob, did the POIs in the field, principal operations inspectors, are they, obviously they're aware of it, but they have a pretty good feel for what's going to be coming in the area of mentoring? It's really not something the FAA has done before. You know, how do you, kind of putting some regulatory information out on something that most people would consider, you know, kind of touchy-feely stuff. Are they ready for that?
Oh, absolutely. The last few years, we've been having annual POI conferences.
Excellent.
Where every
That's a
POI,
great idea.
Yeah, they come in and we spend 3 days and we go through all the contemporary issues and a lot of feedback. So it's served us well, I think.
So they know it's coming.
Absolutely.
How about over at RAA? Have you guys had some discussion with the mentoring piece, Paul?
Well, we certainly have it at Endeavor Air.
Right, so is that being shared? I think that's be a good recommendation.
Yeah, we haven't had a discussion of it per
Right.
se, but I have no doubt that there
It
is
will
some
come
going
up
on
with the-
elsewhere. Obviously, Envoy is one.
Right. Yeah, because it's coming. It's coming. It's very interesting when we're out in the field talking to various airlines and we say to the management team, hey, you know, you got these regulations that are going to be coming your way. And, you know, regulation, it's a tough word to them sometimes. And here we go, they roll their eyes, yet another regulation coming. But now this is something that I think our airline management teams need to be aware of, that this is going to be coming. It's important for us. And that's why I asked about the piece about the POIs. Because they're the conduit to the certificate holder saying, hey, this is coming this way. Dave, what about this captain mentoring thing?
Yeah.
You know, people think it's just new hires and things.
Yeah, it's just new hires. We've kind of been talking about
Yeah.
that, but actually, I like to look at it as we can include captains in there, but years ago at ALPA here, we were talking about how do we define, low experience
Right.
pilots? And any of us at any time in our career can actually be a low experienced in
Exactly.
the flight deck. I can be a domestic pilot going international. I can be a new captain, just changing airplanes. And so when we look at this and I think as Kent mentioned, you can have captains mentoring first officers in a different respect, and first officers actually mentoring captains.
Right.
And I think what I would like to see, I think we should start pushing, is this dialogue, this exchange of mentoring from that respect. Not the new hires will bring it out because they'll be used to talking and working, but also within the flight deck is let's go back to talking about professionalism, talking about flight duties, what are the responsibilities of pilots is, talking about the profession, and even debriefing the flights. I think Harry's still here from Airbus.
Yeah.
Good friend. He asked a question at one of our meetings a few months back and asked, it was about 30, 40 pilots in the room, and he says, how many of you have actually debriefed your last flight? And it was only a handful of hands, 5 to 10, that actually went up. And we started thinking about that, and he was shocked a little bit, I was, but then we think about it, and our whole job in a way has changed where we have, if you got 30 or 40 minute turns, and you're behind, and you're doing, you land, I got a new first officer coming in because it just got switched out. We become so fine-tuned that we don't even have a chance sometimes to go back to the basics. But when we started flying, we always pre-briefed, flew the mission, and debriefed. And we talked about it. And if I'm flying with the same person, yeah, I can debrief it on the next leg or something like that. But just doing that is, hey, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? Let's talk about it. Exchange the experiences, because we're not together as much, as I mentioned earlier. We're not together as much in training, and we used to learn a lot of that. So that would be one thing. With the mentoring themselves, I think it says in the ATP that the captain should be a mentor to the first officer, but how much training have we given that captain on how to be a mentor? It's not in our DNA. We're not all born with it. Some people are better than others, but how do we actually prepare our captains to be good mentors? So we should all be having some type of captain training school that should be taught by line pilots, by captains. We do have some instances now where first officers are teaching captains to be captains, and I haven't quite figured that out yet as a training director. Is how does that work? But to me, it should be line captains training the new captains, because they know what's out there. They should have recency of experience. We can train some things if you haven't flown in a while, but again, how do we train people that when we have people that aren't experienced in that area? So in-person training. We have some instances for other types of training, and I'll use CRM as an example, where the training is all being done on free distance learning. So again, it just has me step back and ask, well, but isn't this supposed to be personal, and I'm supposed to be learning how to communicate and work with somebody, but I'm doing it with a computer? So to me, the same thing goes here as we develop this captain mentoring and this discussion that goes on between the pilots. It should be a combination of both, if we want to use some distance learning or computer-based training, but which should be done in the classroom with the chance to observe, do role-playing, especially with the captains, and during captain's training, have a chance to see how they would interact with the first officer and that type of thing, and role-playing. And the initial training should be that way, so maybe the recurrent training we could do more via distance learning or something, but there should be that initial training should be done in person with an instructor at some point.
Yeah, unfortunately, our training to our mentors is all over the phone. We have transitioned recently to WebEx type training, where they can share their computer screen, and the mentor can show the person that's being trained exactly where to go and what kind of computer screens they have. It can be, how do you call that, taped, so they can see it later, they can observe it later. It's not ideal. We rather have them do it in person. Unfortunately, there's no way we can have 80 mentors get their time off in order to get trained. But what is interesting listening to Kent about mentoring in the collegiate level, we actually get a lot of our mentors from people who had mentoring experience before.
That's why I asked that. It's important.
And it's really helpful that we get mentors that already are experienced
Absolutely.
in having some kind of mentoring capabilities, because it doesn't come natural.
No.
And I think we can start all across the board. I always pitch the life cycle. We start out with the person when we bring them into the industry, we should prepare them all the way through and work with them. I think even starting at the college level, doing the debriefings, and then one of the things that I like to use is facilitated debriefs.
Sure.
And I think if we train them early on, and hopefully doing that to debrief, is they can actually get more out of it, more with the CRM, so that would then blend over into the flight deck. Right. And we can talk about the professionalism there, as well as all the different airmanship qualities that we're expecting. And this will take us we're moving into what we want to call competency-based training, where we're actually getting away, hopefully, from just filling squares, just teaching check rides, to where we're still going back to teaching people how to fly airplanes, how to do the job, so when they leave our training, they're there to do the job and they have the skills to do it instead of learning on the line. So we're trying to make that thing, but in order to do that, the pilots need to be able to determine what they're doing right and wrong, and how to fix it and get that communication going.
Right. I'm glad you didn't use the line cradle to grave. I'm getting close to the end of looking forward to retirement years, and going to have a few times in there. But I throw this out generally to the panel. A lot of mentoring and example setting goes on when we meet as a crew. It's so important at all of our airlines. We know in in our in-dock training for new hires or our new captain upgrade curriculum. We know how important it is to get together before we start a flight sequence and talk to each other. But one of the things that we're beginning to see in the ASO, in the safety organization, is that in an interest to provide more duty time, for example, throughout the day, that a lot of those times have been cut by airlines. And I would encourage you all to go back to your airlines, and if there's airline management in here, just realize how important that time is before we start a flight sequence to set the tone for that flight operation. And a lot of mentoring and example setting goes in there, where a captain or even an experienced first officer maybe helps out the captain in their mission and flight planning. That's mentoring. And if we cut that time, and I'm not saying we should show up to work 2 to 3 hours before we fly, not in any way, but it's not uncommon now in the industry, in the interest of expanding duty days and such, that a lot of that time has been cut. And it's important. That's important time to us, where we really set the stage and mentor each other and help each other and prepare for flying. With that said, my boss is looking over my shoulder, and I'm sure he's not looking at me commenting on my haircut. That probably means it's the end of the briefing.
Thank
Captain
you, Frank.
Hogeman,
Great
you have
panel.
it.
I wanted to thank you
Great.
and your panelists. Nice jobs.
Thanks.